My name is Marcus Elrich, and every evening for the past 22 years I've walked out of the garage of my modest Columbus home with grease on my hands and a quiet pride in my heart. Since I took apart my first carburetor at age 14, I've believed in the power of precision and the dignity of honest labor. At 44, I'm not flashy. My wardrobe consists mostly of well-worn flannels and mechanics coveralls, but I've always taken care of what's mine, including my 2014 black Dodge Charger, which I bought with cash after years of overtime and late nights. That car wasn't just transportation. It was a testament to every hour I spent learning my craft, every bolt I tightened, every engine I coaxed back to life. It was mine in every way that mattered. That Tuesday evening, after a brutal 10-hour shift wrenching underneath decrepit transmissions and patching rusted exhausts, I shoved my toolbox into the back of the shop van and headed home. My bones ached, my face still bore the faint odor of motor oil, and my mind was already drifting to the cold brew I'd promised myself. When I walked up the driveway, the January air bit at my cheeks, and a half-frozen breath escaped my lips. I rounded the corner of the garage expecting to see the smooth curves of the Charger's hood reflecting the glow of the street lamp, but the space was empty. My heart skipped, then plummeted. No tow truck, no flashing hazard lights, just an empty parking space under a blanket of snow. At first, I thought maybe I'd misremembered where I left it. I searched my pockets for my key fob and pressed the panic button, but only silence answered. I circled the block, peering down driveways and empty parking strips. I even ducked behind the recycle bins, thinking someone might have hidden the car as a prank. But nothing. The realization settled like concrete in my chest. My Charger was gone. My hand shook as I dialed Talia's number. We'd been married for 10 years, long enough that I could tell her tone without even glancing at the screen. "Hey," she answered. Her voice was calm, too calm for someone who knew her husband was standing in the cold without his only ride home. "Where's my car?" I demanded. She hesitated, a pause that echoed through the phone line. Then, in a voice softer than I'd ever heard, she said, "Aria borrowed it. She had a job interview. It was urgent." Aria, my wife's younger sister, had been living in our guest room just for a few weeks, she'd said when Talia first welcomed her after Aria's messy breakup. I'd agreed without argument. Family helped family, except the few weeks had stretched into months, and Aria still hadn't found steady work. She slept in late, borrowed clothes, and left dishes in the sink. But she was family, so I let it slide. Until now. 10 minutes later, headlights cut through the dusk as Aria rolled up in my Charger. My chest tightened. The car looked battered. The passenger side door caved in, the hood barely latched, and a side mirror hung loose, dangling by its wiring. She popped her gum and leaned against the fender as if the entire scene were perfectly normal. "Some guy ran a red light," she began, chewed gum punctuating each word. Totally not my fault. I stared at her, speech lodged in my throat. I remembered the pride I felt when I polished that car's exterior until its paint gleamed like wet obsidian, the reverence with which I treated the engine block after a fresh tune-up. And here it was, defiled by a careless stranger and returned without so much as an apology. Before I could speak, Talia appeared at the driver's window, wrapping her arms around Aria in a protective embrace. "She's shaken up," Talia cooed, brushing back Aria's hair. "Don't freak out. She's family." I said nothing. I forced myself not to sputter, to keep my jaw from clenching so tight that the joint would ache for days. Talia had weaponized her loyalty, placing Aria's comfort above the car I'd spent years paying off. They both stood there, waiting for me to give in, to sacrifice my anger at the altar of family solidarity. And though I closed my eyes, took a slow, deliberate breath, a crack formed inside me. The same crack that had always held me together under stress, the crack I had kept hidden whenever life tilted off balance. I unlocked the rental car agreement in my mind, picturing the insurance adjuster's promise of a temporary replacement. My hands unclenched as I realized I had options beyond silent acceptance. But in that moment, I stayed rooted to the spot, a man torn between his principles and the small kindness that our society demands when kin are in need. I thought of the countless times I'd walked to work in record heat or biting cold because my transmission shop then wouldn't start, and no one thought to offer me a lift. I remembered the nights I'd nursed my own car on the side of the highway after a breakdown, shivering as passing strangers ignored my pleas. Talia squeezed Aria's shoulder and released her. "Come on," she said softly. Let's get inside. The two of them climbed onto the porch as if nothing had happened, leaving me alone in the driveway with the smashed charger and a fury that burned behind my ribs. I closed the distance to the garage, stepping over a discarded snow shovel and freezing boot prints. Inside, the faint hum of the heater welcomed me. I dropped my head into my hands and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The house felt colder than the outside air. In the silence, I heard my own heartbeat, steady and demanding. It punctuated a single unspoken truth. I wouldn't be ignored. They'd taken more than a car. They chipped away at my dignity, my trust, my sense of ownership over my own life. And in that moment, the foundation of my world shifted. I'd always been a man of action, someone who preferred wrenches to words. Now, for the first time in many years, I sensed a reckoning on the horizon. I wiped the condensation from my palms onto my jeans and made my way to the living room. The heater ticked as though urging me forward. Inside, Talia was pouring Arya a cup of tea, both of them silhouetted by the glow of the lamp. Their backs were to me. They didn't notice I'd come in. And perhaps that was fitting, because the old Marcus, the one who'd tolerated every inconvenience in the name of harmony, had quietly slipped away in the December wind. A new resolve took root in the hollows where my loyalty once lay. I lifted my chin. The family line had been drawn. And now, it was up to me to decide which side I stood on. I stared at the silver Kia's bland exterior the next morning and thought about the roar of my Charger's Hemi engine. The way it accelerated like a piston-fed heartbeat, the way its guttural exhaust note carried a promise of power. This grocery-getter sedan felt like a hospital gown in comparison, functional, uninspiring, something you borrowed from a rental fleet. But life had a way of handing you unpleasant necessities, so I signed the paperwork and drove off, my breath clouding in the frigid Ohio air. By lunch, I already knew I wouldn't be behind this wheel for long. Talia intercepted me just outside the kitchen door, one eyebrow raised like she'd caught me sneaking cookies from the jar. Arya needs it, she said before I could say a word. She has 3 interviews today, one at 9, one at 11, and one at 2. You don't want her stressing about rides, do you? I recognized the tactic, guilt by association. Talia was equating my refusal to loan the rental with sabotage of Arya's future, a conjured vision of her stranded at some drafty office lobby. But I'd spent the past 10 days logging storm-blown miles on my boots, trudging through slush and sleet so the woman who'd covertly taken my Charger could catch an interview she wasn't qualified for. It had gone on long enough. I braced my forearms on the frame of the kitchen window and met her gaze. She already wrecked my car, I said quietly. She can walk a couple blocks to the bus stop. Her lips thinned, and she sighed as if I'd asked for the moon. You're making this about you, she replied. Let her have this. I've been making everything about me, I shot back, thinking of frozen nights when I'd returned home shivering, my hands numb from cold. Not once had I asked them to hand me the keys to the rental. Not once had they offered me a ride. Every day I walked, hoping the routine would dull the sense of betrayal, but it only sharpened it. My dignity was in the distance between home and work, and I was done watching it disappear on cracked sidewalks. Talia opened her mouth, then closed it. She folded her arms and leaned against the counter, the island of our life together suddenly feeling alien and unfamiliar. I could see Arya's silhouette on the other side of the hallway, scrubbing coffee stains out of the carpet, her newest contribution to the household chore list. Family. Let it go. The words had always rung hollow, but now they echoed in the kitchen like a lie. I stepped back, suddenly aware of the stakes. If I took the rental, I risked being branded heartless. If I let her have it, I risked being trampled. I wanted neither label. So I made the choice I'd promised myself I would, integrity over convenience. I'm sorry, I said, my voice steady, but she's not touching it. I turned on my heel and left the room, my boots clicking on the hardwood floor. The shop was a 7-minute drive, but I took my time, letting my mind map out the day ahead. I knew the routine. Check in with Ray, clock in, run diagnostics on the Smithson's minivan, swap out brakes on that old Ford pickup. But something felt different, as if the gears in my life had shifted an inch and thrown every measurement off. When I arrived, Ray gave me a sideways look. His forehead creased like he could see the weight in my shoulders. Before I even removed my coat, he thrust an envelope into my hand. Got this at the front desk, he muttered. From your adjuster. I nodded and tucked it into my jacket. The scent of oil and metal pressed close, a comforting reminder of where I belonged. I clocked in, traded pleasantries with the others, then slipped into the break room for 5 minutes of solitude and coffee. Steam spiraled from the mug as I sliced open the envelope, expecting an updated repair estimate. Instead, I found instructions: how to obtain a statement of loss from the police station and a form to initiate a claim for unauthorized use of the vehicle. My heart clenched. They'd given me the power to officially confront the theft, to hold someone accountable. Not in a courtroom, but at least on paper. I sat back in the vinyl chair, the mug warming my palms as I read the fine print. If I submitted the statement, the adjuster said, they'd pursue subrogation and seek reimbursement from the at-fault party or the driver, which clearly, in their eyes, was Aria. My chest tightened with the gravity of the choice. I'd come this far by turning every bolt and repairing every engine with patience. Now, I had to steer my own life back onto solid ground. An hour later, I found myself in a crammed cubicle at the local police station with a clipboard and a blue pen. A board sergeant looked me over as I recounted the story: the missing charger, the unreported collision, the unauthorized driver. I remembered the way Aria smiled when she first took the car, as though she were entitled. I remembered Talia's soft words to calm me. And I remembered the long nights I spent on foot, feeling smaller with every step. When I finished, the sergeant nodded, stamped my affidavit, and slid it back across the counter. I tucked it into my pocket beside the rental paperwork and walked out into the pale winter sun. The wind tugged at the edges of my coat, but I stood firm. I'd drawn the line. In the coming days, the insurance company would investigate, and the truth would come into focus. I climbed back into the Kia, adjusted the seat and mirrors, and exhaled. The passenger seat still smelled faintly of Aria's bubblegum, sweet and cloying, and for a moment I wrinkled my nose. Then I started the engine, feeling a sense of purpose replace the knot in my chest. This car might not be mine, but I had reclaimed something more important: control over my own journey. As I pulled onto the main road, I resolved that I would no longer walk away from the demands of my own dignity. The long walk hadn't ended. It had merely become a different kind of journey, one where I decided the destination. And for the first time in weeks, I looked forward to every mile. I hesitated at the front door of the shop before stepping inside, my breath visible in the cold afternoon air. In my jacket pocket lay the envelope from the insurance adjuster, its contents pressing against my thigh like a silent indictment. I ducked under the garage door and headed straight for Ray's office, passing the scattered tools and humming lifts that usually felt like home. Today, they felt like witnesses. I knocked once, then pushed the door open. Ray looked up from his desk, eyebrows raised. "You got it," he asked quietly. I laced my fingers around the envelope and handed it over. He slit the top, withdrew the thick sheaf of papers, and spread them across his desk. The top document was my statement of loss, the official form I'd filed at the station. Underneath was something else. The police report from the night of the crash. I swallowed hard. This was the first time I'd seen it, though I knew it existed. I scanned the pages, tracking the stamped seal, the case number, the incident summary. My name was printed there in neat, official type: Marcus Elridge, victim of unauthorized use and hit-and-run damage. My heart pounded as I flipped to the section titled Driver's Statement. That's where I expected Aria's confession to appear. Instead, the report recorded the officer's narrative. Driver admitted to taking the vehicle without owner's permission, described the situation as a family misunderstanding. The words seemed small on the page, but they carried the weight of every mile I'd trudged in the snow, every second I'd waited for someone to acknowledge my loss. Ray reached over and patted my shoulder. "Sounds like she admitted to borrowing it," he said. I nodded, though numbness was spreading through my limbs. I thought back to Aria's gum-smacking nonchalance when she'd returned the charger, her casual shrug, the slight curl of her lip that suggested she expected my forgiveness. And now, here in black and white, was the evidence. She'd knowingly taken my car without permission, and she'd lied about the circumstances to me and to the insurance company. But look at this. Ray pointed to another section. "Your wife's role is different." I leaned in further. The report's second paragraph listed Talia as known knowledge of the unauthorized use. Apparently, Aria had told the officer that only she'd taken the car, and that Talia had no idea what was happening. That was a direct lie, too. Talia had answered my call and confirmed Aria had the charger, then tried to soften the blow with that worn defense: she's family. Here in the report, her known knowledge status was a statement of innocence, a clean slate I knew wasn't true. The paper rattled in my hand as I read the final page. Driver declined to press charges. hopes for an amicable resolution. My breath caught. That note struck like a hammer. The report revealed that Arya had asked the officer to treat it as a misunderstanding, and the officer had dutifully recorded that I didn't want to pursue charges. I clenched my jaw. Each word in that phrase was an erasure of my suffering, my months of cold walks and feigned patience. It was as though my silence had become a legal document, one that bound me to forgiveness unless I spoke up. Ray folded the report carefully and handed it back to me. "They'll use this for the subrogation," he said. "Your adjuster will try to recover costs from Arya's insurance, if she has any. If not, they'll come after her directly." I nodded, my mind racing. I knew Talia and Arya didn't have car insurance between them. Arya was still on Talia's policy, if at all, and their coverage likely wouldn't stretch to the kind of damage I'd had to fix. I looked at Ray and offered a faint smile. "Thanks for showing me." He shrugged. "I sympathetic. You know I got your back." The loyalty in his voice anchored something in me. This wasn't just a personal betrayal, it was a breach of trust one was entitled to address. I cleared my throat and offered the papers back. "I need to talk to the adjuster myself," I said. "And I need to know what my options are." Ray nodded, understanding more in that nod than any words could convey. I spent the rest of the day circling back to my own workspace, each turn of a wrench reminding me why I'd built my life around honesty and craftsmanship. But tonight, I'd rewrite that honesty into my own terms. When I clocked out, I slipped back into my coat and headed to the insurance office downtown. Outside in the parking lot, I paused by my Subaru, a little car, but one I owned outright long before the Charger, and inhaled the crisp air. Under the fading blue light of dusk, I made a decision. I would claim my truth. Inside the insurance office, the adjuster greeted me by name and motioned me to a private booth. She was a professional woman with a kind protocol smile, but I could tell from the set of her jaw that she meant business. I laid the police report on the desk and watched her eyes dart across the pages. She nodded, clicking her pen. "Mr. Elridge, this confirms unauthorized use. And the report shows Mrs. Elridge claimed no knowledge, correct?" I answered quietly, "Yes." My voice was calm, but inside I felt electricity crackle. She explained the subrogation process. They'd advance the cost of repairs to my Charger, then pursue the responsible party for restitution. If necessary, they could place a lien on Arya's assets or seek a judgment. There were timelines, hearings, and paperwork, an entire system built to protect me, but only if I chose to activate it. When we finished, I walked out into the night with a folder of forms and a sense of purpose. In my mind, I replayed Talia's face. Her gentle defense of Arya, the way she'd sided with her sister over me. I felt a pang of sorrow for what our marriage was becoming, but also a hard satisfaction that justice, even a small measure of it, would be served. I climbed into the rental Kia, the engine humming to life. No more walking in the snow. Not when I had the proof, not when the law recognized my ownership and my right to be made whole. I drove home, each turn of the wheel echoing the promise I made to myself. From now on, I would never let my silence be recorded as consent. The road ahead might be rocky, but I was behind the wheel, and at last, I was driving. That night, I walked into the house as if I were a stranger returning to someone else's world. The moment I stepped through the front door, I felt the chill of betrayal settle around my shoulders like a damp coat. I placed my keys on the entryway table and slipped off my boots, each thud against the mad echoing in the quiet. In the living room, the television glowed with a late-night talk show, hosts smiling and asking questions that would never matter to me. I headed to the basement, the only refuge I'd found in recent weeks, where the fluorescent light over my workbench hummed softly. The basement smelled of sawdust, oil, and canvas tarps covering half-finished projects, an old motorcycle frame waiting for new chrome, a metal toolbox I'd rebuilt when I first opened my shop. These familiar scents grounded me the way a story's first page anchors a reader. I sat on the stool I'd installed years ago, reached out, and ran my fingers. Sockets organized by size, wrenches hung like trophies on the pegboard, a single coffee mug stained with grease and bearing the logo of a tool manufacturer I admired. This space was mine, untainted by lies or borrowed conveniences. Above me, the heater kicked on, rattling through the ductwork. I thought of the past 3 weeks, countless steps through wind and snow, aching knees, frostbitten fingers, and the faint hum of resentment building in my chest. Each mile walked had been a silent vote cast against my own worth, and no one had noticed. No one had offered to carry the load for a moment. And then I discovered the police report, the insurance forms, the evidence of their deception. It all crystallized into one undeniable truth. I could no longer remain silent. I closed my eyes and let my hands rest on my lap. In that silence, I heard the dialogue I'd been avoiding, my own voice demanding to be heard. Not shouted, not in anger, but spoken firmly, calmly, without apology. I perceived how often I'd smothered my own needs under the guise of keeping peace. My marriage had become a ledger of compromises, each entry weighted heavily against me. My loyalty was counted as agreement. My patience was catalogued as permission. I realized that love untempered by respect was nothing more than surrender. A low click sounded as I opened the small drawer under the bench, the one where I kept my most valued tools, precision screwdrivers, feeler gauges, a caliper I'd bought when I first apprenticed under Ray. I lifted out my favorite ratchet, its handle smoothed by years of use, and ran it through my fingers. It was a simple thing, capable of delivering measured torque in the right hands. I pressed the release and listened to the satisfying clink as sockets spilled across the wood. The workshop had always been my sanctuary because I controlled the outcome. With the right turn, a bolt would give. With the wrong force, it would slip. Everything here responded to intention. I straightened up, ratchet in hand, and walked toward the stairs. Up above, Talia's soft laughter drifted down. The sound was incongruent with the turmoil I felt. It belonged to a different life. I paused, listening as her voice mingled with Aria's giggles, talking about some new arrangement or plan, likely more excuses or demands. My jaw clenched, but I refused to let anger cloud my purpose. I reminded myself that anger without action is a dead end. I rose to my full height and carried the ratchet upstairs like a talisman. In the hallway, I heard their footsteps and hushed tones. Talia and Aria paused as I approached, their backs to the wall. I held the ratchet loosely at my side, its polished chrome catching the dim light. They exchanged a glance. In that exchange, I saw defiance in Talia's eyes and entitlement in Aria's. They thought I would break. They must have assumed my silence meant compliance. I took a breath and spoke clearly. We need to talk. My voice was calm but firm enough to crack through the pretense of domestic normalcy. They turned to face me, and I saw surprise flicker on Aria's face before she masked it with a practiced smile. Talia's lips pressed into a thin line as she crossed her arms. I set the ratchet on the console table, an intentional gesture. It wasn't a threat, but a symbol of my resolve. I've been silent long enough, I said. I've let you two walk all over our life together, and I've accepted it because you're family. But family doesn't mean trampling someone else's boundaries. Aria opened her mouth to speak, but I held up a hand. Let me finish. The laughter from the living room seemed suddenly intrusive. You took my car without permission. You lied to me. You lied to the police, and you expected me to just absorb it. Then you sold my tools, you spent from my account, and I walked through snow while you used my rental. I've kept my mouth shut because I thought that's what love required, but I was wrong. Talia's posture tightened. Marcus, you're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. It's not bigger than it needs to be, I replied, my tone measured. It's exactly as big as it should be. You both broke my trust, and it cost me time, money, and peace of mind. I glanced at the ratchet. This, I said, picking it up, is a tool I use to bring things back into alignment. It applies the right force in the right place to fix what's broken. I've decided it's time to use the right force in my life. Aria's shoulders slumped, and Talia's defiance faltered. They exchanged another look, this time without confidence. I continued, I'm taking control back. The insurance company is pursuing restitution. I'm filing for divorce. And I'm filing charges for theft and fraud. Silence stretched between us, punctuated only by the hum of the furnace. I saw the color drain from Aria's cheeks in the realization in Talia's eyes that she could no longer deflect. I tucked the ratchet into my belt, a symbolic gesture of closing that chapter. I'm done being silent, I said softly. From now on, I speak for myself. I turned and walked away, each step echoing my newfound conviction. Behind me, their voices were small and uncertain. Above all, I heard the clear, resonant answer in my own mind. At last, I was respecting the boundaries I'd long neglected. And in that respect, I found the seed of a new resolve, one that would guide every mile of the journey ahead. The next morning, I woke before dawn to the shrill insistence of my alarm and lay in the darkness for a long moment, listening to the house breathe around me. I could hear the soft click of the thermostat, the hum of the furnace, and the faint rustle of curtains as the wind pressed against the windows. I rolled out of bed, careful not to wake Talia or Aria, and pulled on my work clothes. My boots felt heavier than usual, as if the weight of every unpaid step I'd taken in the snow had settled into their soles. I cinched the laces, pulled the rental key from the nightstand, and headed downstairs. In the kitchen, the silver Kia sat under the harsh glare of the overhead lamp, its unremarkable form glowing like an insult. I crossed the floor deliberately, each step echoing on the hardwood, and set the key on the counter. Talia emerged from the living room rubbing sleep from her eyes, hair mussed and cheeks flushed with confusion. "Morning," she said, voice cautious. She noticed my expression and turned, tracing my posture with her gaze. "You're taking the car?" I met her eyes squarely. "Yes," I said. "Aria's interviews can wait. I need it today." Her lips thinned, and she ran a hand through her hair. "Marcus, she has an interview at noon. What am I supposed to do?" I exhaled slowly, deliberately. The sun was just beginning to peep over the horizon, painting the sky in bruised pinks and purples. "She can walk," I replied. "She's already walked when it wasn't her car. You both forgot how to do that." She turned away, heading for the cupboard to grab a coffee mug. "You're making this bigger than it needs to be," she said over her shoulder. "Maybe it needs to be big," I said, voice low but firm. She paused, hand frozen on the handle of the coffee jar. I watched her shoulders stiffen, felt that familiar ache in my chest tighten. "You lied to me," I continued. "You let her drive my car without permission. You lied to the insurance. You lied to the police. You left me walking in the snow while you both stayed warm." She closed her eyes, pinched the bridge of her nose. When she spoke again, her voice cracked. "I was just trying to protect her." I shook my head, stepping closer so she could see the resolve in my eyes. "Family doesn't mean silencing the truth. Protecting her doesn't mean sacrificing me." The words felt righteous as they left my mouth, honest and necessary, but even as I said them, I wondered at the distance that had grown between us. When had I become a man who felt wronged by his own household? She set the coffee jar down with a clatter, then met my gaze. "I don't know what you want from me." I took the rental key and held it out between us, a small bridge across the gulf. "I want respect," I said simply. "And I want to drive to work in something I paid for." I turned and walked to the door, the key still between my fingers. Before stepping outside, I added, "Move her stuff out if you have to. I'll send her the bill for the damage." The cold air hit me like a splash of ice, waking me fully. I slid into the Kia and warmed my hands on the steering wheel. For a moment, I just sat and watched my driveway, the front of the house where our lives were entwined, wondering at the cost of these newly drawn lines. When I finally started the engine, the car's hum sounded alien compared to the Charger's roar, but it was mine for the day, and that was enough. The drive to the shop was smooth but surreal. In the Charger, I would have felt the roads pulse through the suspension, the tires gripping pavement like promises. The Kia simply carried me along, indifferent. I thought about the two cracks that had formed in our home, Aria's first unilateral decision to take my car, and Talia's unwavering defense of that decision. Together, they had chipped away at my sense of belonging, until I was a stranger in my own house. Today, I refused to be a stranger to myself. At the shop, Ray was already idling by the door, sipping a travel mug of coffee. He watched me park, studied the rental's nondescript profile, then gave me a sympathetic nod. I turned off the engine and climbed out, offering a short smile. "Morning," I said. He held up his mug. "Got an argument this morning, I hear. Everything okay?" I sighed, locking the door. "Better than okay," I said. I took back the car. Ray's eyes widened a bit. "Good. You'd never have let her use this one." I shrugged, loading my bag over my shoulder. I needed to draw the first line. He nodded slowly, as if weighing my words. "Lines are good," he said. "They keep out what you don't want." Inside the shop, the air was thick with oil and hot metal. The regular rhythm of hammers and spinning wheels greeted me like a lifeline. I clocked in, ran through a quick safety check of my station, and then leaned into the first vehicle waiting for me, a blue minivan with a whining alternator. As the hood opened, I felt a familiar calm settle over me. Here, in the wrench's predictable turn and the bolt's reluctant release, I found certainty. I thought of the forms I had yet to file. The police report disavowing my silent consent, the divorce papers waiting for Talia's signature, the restitution claim I would file against Aria. Each would be a tool in its own right, precisely wielded to repair what had been broken. And as I reached for my socket set, I realized that, for the first time in weeks, I wasn't just turning wrenches. I was turning my life around. The long walk wasn't over, but today I traveled another mile on my own terms. one that began with the simple act of drawing a line and ended with the resolve to never step beyond it again. Late that afternoon, I was elbow-deep in an old Ford pickup's wheel well, fighting a stubborn bolt, when Ray flagged me over. His face was pale, his eyes flicking toward the open garage door like he'd spotted something unsettling out there. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped into the bay entrance just as a skeptical breeze swept past, carrying the faint sound of distant traffic. Ray held a crumpled printout in his hand. An amateur post from Facebook Marketplace. My heart sank before I read the words. Snap-on rolling tool chest, $2, 800 OBO. Located in Columbus, Ohio. I recognized the photograph instantly. It was my chest, same dents in the corner, same weathered sticker that read July 17, same scattered tools lined up on top exactly as I'd left them. A pit opened in my stomach. I turned to look across the lot toward my garage, where I kept that chest parked at the edge of my workspace. The lid was closed now, but I could almost see the sockets and screwdrivers I'd meticulously organized, the torque wrenches I'd collected over years of apprenticeship, and that vintage multimeter I'd acquired on eBay after saving for months. Tools weren't just tools to me, they were benchmarks of skill, markers of progress, the hard evidence of every difficult problem I'd solved. Who posted this? I asked, my voice low. Ray shrugged. It's under a name I don't recognize. This person has a profile with exactly 2 friends and 0 history. I clicked the seller's link and it led to some burner account. His mouth twitched with sympathy. They've been messaging potential buyers all day. I took the paper from him, my fingers trembling around the fold. The price was less than half of what I knew the chest was worth if sold legitimately. The listing described the contents, tools included, various sockets, wrenches, specialty tools. Pics available on request. It smelled like opportunism, a desperate grab for quick cash. And it stank of betrayal. I dropped the printout on a nearby workbench and headed out the door without a word. The December light was fading, and the air had grown heavy with the promise of snow. I walked to the driveway and surveyed the garage exterior, looking for signs of forced entry. The padlock on the side door was intact. The overhead door tracks were unbent. Whoever had taken my chest hadn't busted in. They'd had a key. Talia or Aria, or both, had helped themselves to my sanctuary. My mind raced as I examined the driveway for tire tracks that might match the timeline of the sale and the pickup appointment. I noticed a faint smear of black grease on the concrete beneath where the chest usually sat. I knelt and tapped it with my gloved finger. Fresh. My chest hadn't been moved for months until now. The realization hit me like a wrench to the ribs. They'd planned this. While I was at work, immersed in engines and exhausts, they'd orchestrated the theft of my livelihood piece by piece. Adrenaline surged through me, and I stormed back inside, slamming the door behind me so the echo rattled through the shop. Ray looked up, startled. I waved the paper in the air. They sold my chest. I barked. He stood, knocking over a stool. Let's get details, he said, hustling after me. We ducked into his office, and I recounted everything I knew. Aria's spate of purchases on the joint account, the way she'd ordered food deliveries while Talia coded them as house help, and now this. I showed him my workstation drawers, half empty and bare. He peered inside. The torque wrenches were gone, the calipers missing, the precision screwdrivers nowhere in sight. Even the dented old sockets I kept for spare parts were gone. My collection had been liquidated in one fell swoop. Ray rubbed his temples. We need to document everything. Print this listing, record all your missing items, any emails or messages. We'll get the date and time stamped. I nodded numbly, my chest heaving. I felt a cold fury kindling in my core, hot as a running engine. The shop that had once been my refuge now felt like the scene of a crime. We spent the next hour compiling evidence, screenshots of the marketplace post, notes on each missing tool, serial numbers where I could remember them. Ray offered to call in a favor with a tech friend who monitored pawn shops for stolen goods. I agreed before he even finished the sentence. The thought of my tools turning up in someone else's hands made me sick. I pictured a stranger using my torque wrench on an engine, strangers leaning on my multimeter to test circuits. The intimacy of my craft violated. By closing time, I had a folder bulging with evidence and a plan forming in my mind. I'd file a police report immediately, naming Aria and Talia as suspects. They had access, means, and motive. Then, I'd follow every lead, check pawn shops, scour online posts, and demand restitution for each tool. The law would back me up, but I knew the process would be slow. In the meantime, my work would slow, too. Every mechanic relied on his set, and I was missing half mine. I left the shop with the folder under my arm, the crisp air slicing through my coat. At home, the windows were dark. The silver Kia still sat in the drive, but the garage light remained off. I walked to the side door and used my key to slip inside. In the silence of the empty house, my boots clicked on the hardwood floor, and I felt the absence of my tools like an ache in my hands. I found Talia in the living room, curled on the couch with a book. She looked up, startled. "Marcus, what are you doing home so early?" I stood there, evidence folder in hand. Her eyes flicked to it. I cleared my throat. "Where are my tools?" I asked, voice low and calm. The calm was deliberate, a veneer over the maelstrom of betrayal I felt. She shook her head, confused. "What tools?" I laid the listing photo and inventory list on the coffee table. "My Snap-on chest," I said. "All the items inside. Torque wrenches, calipers, screwdrivers, special sockets. They're gone. Someone listed them for sale." Her gaze flicked up to mine, panic spreading across her face. "That's ridiculous. Why would I do that?" "Because you needed money," I said, stepping closer. "You told me Aria was helping around the house, yet she never lifted a finger. She spent $200 a week on delivery orders and called it help. Meanwhile, you funneled money through apps labeled as house help. This fits the pattern." She parted her lips, fumbling for words. When none came, she slumped back, blinking rapidly. You can't be serious," she whispered. I opened the folder. "I'm filing a police report tomorrow. I'll press theft charges. I let that settle. I won't let you walk over me anymore." In the hush that followed, I saw the fracture etched on her face, the same fracture I'd seen in my own heart. And as I stood in that living room, evidence laid bare between us, I knew the next steps would reshape everything. Our marriage, our home, my sense of who they were. The tools that disappeared had taken more than metal. They'd taken the illusion of trust. Now, I would reclaim both my tools and my dignity, one precise turn at a time. I stepped out of the shower and wrapped a towel around my waist, the steam curling around my shoulders like a guilty secret. Outside, the afternoon light had turned cold and gray, and a thin layer of ice glazed the driveway. My phone buzzed against the tile, and I dried my hand on the towel before picking it up. The caller ID flashed Ray's name, and I answered on the third ring. "Marcus," he said in a low voice that carried the weight of bad news. "You need to see this." He didn't elaborate, so I grabbed my coat, tossed on a hat, and slipped into my boots, leaving the rest of the house behind. The Toyota Corolla in the driveway was already encrusted with frost, but I locked the front door behind me and headed for the garage, the crisp air biting at my wet skin. At the shop, Ray was waiting with a printout tucked under his arm. His office door was closed, and I followed him inside, the metal frame rattling as I pushed it open. He sat me down behind the desk and slid the paper across. "Take a look," he said. I unfolded the glossy sheet and blinked twice. There, in bold text, was an ad on Facebook Marketplace. Snap-on rolling tool chest, $2, 800 OBO. Pickup in Columbus. Tools included: sockets, torque wrenches, specialty items. Photos on request. Beneath the ad was a grainy photo taken in dim light. My chest, dinted in the same corner where I'd whacked it months ago, the faded July 17 sticker still stuck on the front. My breath caught, and I felt anger twist into something darker: hurt, disbelief, betrayal. "Who posted this?" I asked, barely above a WH. It was a newly created account with a generic name, 0 friends, and no activity beyond this listing. "Looks like a burner," he said. "They've messaged a few buyers already." The weight of his words pressed down on me. I thought of every tool in that chest, the custom ratchet I'd saved for, the set of deep sockets I'd inherited from my father, the torque wrenches I'd used to calibrate every engine I'd ever rebuilt. Those tools were the proof of my skill, the markers of my dedication. Now someone had turned them into a fast cash pawn, all behind my back. I stood abruptly and stalked to the corner of the office, running my fingers through my hair. My pulse pounded in my ears. "They didn't break in," I muttered. "They had to have a key." I swiveled around. "They planned it." Ray nodded solemnly. "Probably while you were at work. They knew what they were doing." He closed his laptop. "We need to document everything. Print the listing, take screenshots, note the serial numbers where you can. Then we call the police." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather outside. "I want names," I said, my voice taut with controlled fury. "I want to know which one of them thought she could just sell my tools." Ray slid back the ad and raised an eyebrow. I'll start tracking pawn shop posts and set up alerts for your tools. But this, he tapped the photo, happened here. He gestured at the office door, as if the walls themselves had witnessed the theft. That evening, I returned home with a folder of printed screenshots and an inventory list of every missing tool. The icicles hanging from the eaves glinted in the porch light as I walked up to the house, my breath fogging in front of me. Inside, the Kia was still in the driveway, but the garage light was off. I carried the folder into the living room, where Talia and Arya sat on the couch, the glow of the television painting their faces in pale hues. I set the folder on the coffee table, and the room fell silent. Arya glanced at me, gum popping softly in her mouth, while Talia looked away, her lips pressed into a line. I held their gazes one at a time, letting the tension build until it filled the space between us. Someone sold my tool chest. I began. All the tools inside, missing. I spread the papers across the table, the ad, the messages from buyers, the inventory list with serial numbers. Arya's gum stopped cracking. Talia's eyes finally met mine, wary and wide. Arya opened her mouth, but the words froze. She dug her nails into the couch cushion. I didn't, she started. Don't, I said, cutting her off. I've already got everything documented. I'm filing a police report tomorrow. My tone was flat, each word deliberate. I know you both had access, and I will find out who did this. Talia's shoulders sagged, and she folded her hands in her lap. Marcus, please, she whispered. It was just money. Just money. I repeated, voice rising. These are my tools, my life's work. You think I paid for them with just money? I invested time, sweat, respect into each one. I stood, pacing in front of the coffee table. While I was working long hours, I trusted you. I thought we shared this life. And you sold my tools behind my back. Arya's gaze flicked between her sister and me. I needed cash, she said, voice shaking. I had bills. I never agreed to sell my tools. I shouted. The television blared behind me, but I didn't care. You stole them. Talia rose and stepped toward me, her eyes brimming. Please, Marcus. I held up a hand. No more pleading. I want restitution. I'm freezing our account. I'll be speaking to the bank. And if I don't get every tool back, or their value, I will press charges. A tremor ran through Talia's frame. She looked at Arya, whose lip quivered, eyes glistening. The silence that followed was thick, as though we'd broken something unfixable. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, the fatigue of betrayal and confrontation crashing over me. I'm going to bed, I said at last. Figure out what you're going to do. I left the living room, the folders still scattered across the coffee table, and climbed the stairs. My heart felt bruised, but beneath the hurt there was a firm resolve. They'd taken my tools, my trust, my willingness to forgive. Now they would face the consequences. And I would rebuild, not from the tools I'd lost, but from the boundaries I'd finally learned to draw. The photo arrived in my inbox late that afternoon, a single image that shattered the careful facade of our home. I was in my shop van, waiting at a red light with a wrench still warm between my fingers, when the notification pinged. I opened the email from an address I didn't recognize and stared at the JPEG preview. Talia and Arya standing arm in arm in a sunlit vineyard, glasses of rose raised in a mock toast. Their faces were alight with laughter, heads tilted together in an intimate pose. The caption, scrawled in elegant script across the bottom, read, New Beginnings. Love the ones who choose you. And just below, in a smaller font, my wife's Facebook status declared, Single. My chest tightened. The world narrowed to that one image, the soft afternoon glow, the rolling hills of grapevines, the pastel hues of their dresses, every detail a testament to their complicity. I felt the restraint I'd maintained for weeks unravel, even though I didn't allow myself to react immediately. The light turned green, and I drove straight to the shop, each rotation of the tires punctuating my mounting resolve. Inside the bay, Ray looked up as I stormed in, wrench still tucked in my back pocket. He raised an eyebrow at my expression. What's up? I showed him the photo on my phone. He shook his head in disbelief. That's brutal. I slipped the phone into my pocket and headed for my office, mind racing through the implications. This wasn't just about stolen tools and unauthorized use of my charger anymore. This was Talia's open declaration that our marriage was over, delivered in the most public way possible. She'd used the winery photo as her announcement, a final flourish to sever the tie between us. And Arya stood beside her, triumphant in the glow of newfound freedom. My heart pounded. The stakes had shifted from restitution to something more consequential. I'd already drafted divorce papers in my mind, but now their reality loomed closer. I pulled open my desk drawer and retrieved the manila envelope where I'd stashed the preliminary motion, divorce petition, asset inventory, charges for theft and fraud. I spread the photo on top of the documents and reached for my phone to call Renee. Her voice came on the line before the second ring, calm and professional. "Marcus, how are we proceeding?" she asked. I exhaled, steadying my tone. "I just received my wife's public status change," I said. "She's posted a photo with Aria, announced herself single. I need to file immediately." Renee didn't hesitate. "Understood. I'll finalize the paperwork today and file an emergency motion to freeze joint assets. We'll include the photo as evidence of her intent to abandon the marriage and as a demonstration of her ongoing collusion with Aria. I'll also prepare affidavits for the theft and unauthorized use claims." I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. "Thank you," I said. Hanging up, I refocused on the folder before me. I slid the photo into a clear sleeve alongside the police report, the marketplace evidence, and the billing statements for the charger repairs. Each item was a brushstroke in the portrait of their betrayal. The rest of the day passed in a blur of torque specifications and diagnostic checks, but my mind was elsewhere, reorganizing our life into categories of what I would keep and what I would relinquish. I thought of the house where I'd built memories with Talia, holidays by the fireplace, lazy Sunday breakfasts, and the guest room where Aria had unpacked her suitcase for the 100th time. All of it would be up for division. When closing time arrived, I drove home under a bruised sky. The driveway was empty, the Kia still gone, the Charger's replacement tucked in the garage. I unlocked the front door and entered the silent house, the only sound my footsteps on the hardwood. I laid the folder and the winery photo on the kitchen island. Talia walked in from the bedroom, dressed for dinner. She froze at the sight. "Marcus, why is that here?" she asked softly, eyes flicking to the documents. I met her gaze, unflinching. "I filed the motion," I said. "Assets frozen. Divorce petition submitted. I've included your announcement as evidence." Her face fell. She took a hesitant step forward, palms up. I didn't think you'd actually go through with it. Your Facebook post says otherwise," I replied quietly. "You chose to make it official without telling me. You and Aria made the same choice, to betray." She shook her head, tears brimming. "I thought you'd come around." I pressed my fingers to my temples, feeling the pressure of every lie and every step I'd walked alone. Love can't exist without respect. You showed neither. I paused, voice softer now. "I'm sorry it ended this way, but it's over." Talia's shoulders slumped, and she closed her eyes. I turned and walked away, leaving the photo and papers behind. In the kitchen's cold fluorescence, their silhouettes on the screen glowed like a memory I no longer recognized. That night, I crawled into bed alone and stared at the ceiling, the rustle of the house settling around me. The winery photo replayed in my mind. Two women toasting each other's freedom, their champagne glasses raised against a sky I once thought we shared. I thought of the miles I'd walked in snow, the torque I'd applied to engines, the papers I'd signed to reclaim what was mine. And though my heart ached for what I'd lost, I felt a fierce clarity. This chapter of my life had ended, and it had ended on my terms. The next dawn would bring new beginnings, roads I would choose for myself, boundaries I would never again allow to be crossed. And in that promise, I found a measure of peace. I was up early the next morning, running a wrench along the brake caliper of a late-model SUV when the knock came. It was firm, insistent, different from the usual pound of a delivery. I exchanged a look with Ray, who'd stopped mid-stride to watch the garage door. His eyes were sharp under raised brows, as though he could already tell trouble had arrived. I tightened the bolt, set my tools aside, and headed to the front door, wiping grease from my palms onto my coveralls. Outside, sunlight glinted off the black and white sheriff's cruiser parked on the street, the kind of vehicle that marked the start of an irrevocable change. Two deputies stood on either side of a third figure, Aria. Her hands were cuffed in front of her, and she wore the pale complexion of someone who'd slept poorly, eyes swollen, hair a tangled halo. When she saw me, her lip trembled, and she half-smiled, as though greeting an old friend rather than the man she betrayed. I kept my expression even, gripping the doorframe until my knuckles whitened. The taller deputy cleared his throat and produced a small notebook. "Mr. Elridge?" he asked, voice low but carrying across the winter air. "We have a warrant for the arrest of your sister-in-law, Aria Bennett, on charges of felony theft, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, and fraud." My chest tightened. I'd anticipated this moment, but nothing could have prepared me for the weight of seeing her in handcuffs, the real instrument of justice replacing my own quiet resolve. My mind flicked back to the first time she'd driven off in my Charger, gum popping as she waved, and at every cold step I'd taken afterward. Now those steps, those silences, had culminated here. Aria's eyes found mine, pleading. I remembered the nights I'd checked my phone, hoping for a word of remorse. Instead, I'd received passive-aggressive texts, gaslit excuses, a family masquerade that valued her comfort over my dignity. Now, she stood before me, terrified but defiantly insisting on her own narrative. The deputy continued, Ms. Bennett, you have the right to remain silent. He read her Miranda rights, the words echoing like a tolling bell. Aria's shoulders sagged, and she stared at the ground as they led her toward the cruiser. I felt nothing but a steady calm, neither triumph nor vindication, only the satisfaction of fairness fulfilled. I stepped onto the porch and closed the door behind me. The deputies exchanged nods, then left with Aria in the back seat, lights flashing once before vanishing down the street. I stood there until the sound of the engine faded, as if by lingering I could tether this moment to memory. Then I locked the door and walked back to the driveway, each step deliberate, as though I were retracing every indignity she'd inflicted. Inside, Talia appeared at the top of the stairs, face pale and drawn. She'd emerged in a robe, hair dripping from her shoulders, disbelieving eyes fixed on me. What? She began, but the words caught in her throat. I didn't answer. I just held up a sheaf of papers. The arrest warrant, stamped and signed by a judge, and the police report detailing Aria's admission of taking my Charger without consent, her unauthorized sale of my tools, and her repeated fraud against our shared finances. Talia's eyes darted from the documents to my face, to the empty driveway where the cruiser had stood. Marcus, her voice broke. Guilt, shame, regret flashed across her features. But I had learned that remorse offered without change was meaningless, a hollow sound. I folded my arms and leaned against the doorframe, the rigid stance I'd adopted these past weeks now part of my posture. She's been arrested, I said quietly, for the crimes she committed in this house. Talia sank to the bottom step, hands gripping the railing. I didn't know how to stop her, she whispered. I tried to protect her. Protecting her meant protecting me, too, I replied, voice gentle but firm. Instead, you both conspired to steal from me. I flipped through the warrant. The charges include felony theft, unauthorized use of a motor vehicle, and fraud. I provided the evidence. Talia looked up, tears slipping down her cheeks. Please, Marcus. I shook my head. The law will decide her fate now. And mine. I paused, the silence heavy. I don't hate her, but I can't tolerate being trampled. She stood and approached me slowly, as though crossing a chasm she herself had built. What happens now? I considered the question. Beyond the arrest lay court dates, restitution hearings, the unyielding machinery of justice. But I also thought of the loneliness that awaited me. Aria gone to jail, Talia estranged by her own complicity, and the home around us forever altered. My heart clenched, but I had learned to find clarity in discomfort. I'll continue pressing charges, I said. The tools, the car, the money, they all need to be returned or repaid. And you? I looked directly at Talia. Need to decide if you're staying or leaving. I've already filed for divorce. She flinched, as though struck, but she nodded, understanding that this was the final line drawn in our life together. I stepped back, opening the door wider. You can pack what you need, I said. I'll have the movers here in 2 days. Talia's shoulders trembled, and she closed her eyes. I'm sorry, she whispered. Then she turned and walked into the house, footsteps echoing down the hall. I watched her go, then shut the door firmly behind me. The house felt colder now, stripped of pretense. I walked to my garage and placed the arrest warrant on the workbench next to my favorite ratchet, the tool I used to realign what was broken. The bench was spotless, the tools neatly arranged, my sanctuary intact. I touched the ratchet's handle and felt its familiar weight. Justice had come to my doorstep, but it had been crafted by my own resolve. And as I stood there, surrounded by the implements of my trade, I understood that boundaries, once enforced, could restore even the most fractured of homes. Months passed in a blur of restitution checks, court dates, and the steady hum of work at the shop. The stolen tools trickled back to me, one by one, recovered from pawn shops or surrendered by buyers who'd never known their true origin. Aria's misdemeanor plea cost her a fraction of what she'd taken, but enough to send a clear message. I wouldn't tolerate theft, even from my own family. Talia fought the divorce for all she was worth, citing dependency and goodwill, But the judge saw the evidence, her complicity in fraud, the shared deception, and granted me the clean break I needed. Our joint account was frozen, then dismantled. My retirement fund remained untouched. The house, once a home, was sold, its proceeds funding a modest down payment on a smaller property, one I chose alone, with only the memories I wanted to keep. I moved in on a cold morning in early spring, the air still edged with frost, carting boxes of tools and t-shirts, books and photos. My new garage felt spacious, the cement floor swept clean, every socket and ratchet slot waiting for its rightful place. One evening, as I tightened the lid on my Snap-on chest, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I opened it to find Talia's name on the screen. "I miss the way you loved me. I think about what we had." I stared at the words, the bubblegum sweetness of her plea clashing with the memory of every lie and every lonely mile I'd walked. My thumb hovered over the reply field. Love, I thought, real love, demands respect. I deleted the message. No response. Instead, I slid the phone into my pocket, picked up my keys, and walked outside into the evening air. My garage door rumbled open to reveal the midnight blue Dodge Charger I'd bought with the insurance payout. Its polished curves caught the last light of dusk, the engine's purr a familiar promise of freedom. I settled behind the wheel, pressed the starter, and felt the familiar surge of power beneath me. The road stretched out before me, empty and waiting. In the rearview mirror, the lights of my new home glowed softly, but I kept my eyes on the highway ahead. I shifted into drive and eased onto the pavement, the Charger's engine humming like a heartbeat in sync with my own. Every mile I traveled was a testament to boundaries respected, to dignity reclaimed. I thought of the years I'd spent building a life around honesty and hard work, my reputation as a mechanic unblemished, my heart scarred by betrayal but unbroken. As the road unfurled before me under the glow of streetlights, I felt a profound resolve settle in my chest. The journey had been long and painful, but I had steered it back on course. And now, I drove forward, free to choose each turn, each throttle of possibility.